I was staring at the lake when my father's words cut through the silence like a blade through silk. Jade won't care. She owes us this much anyway. The coffee mug slipped from my fingers, ceramic fragments scattering across the wooden deck. In that single moment, 32 years of doubt crystallized into absolute certainty. I wasn't their daughter. I was collateral. Something to be leveraged, stripped, and discarded when convenient. My name is Jade Hartley, and that afternoon by the water changed everything they thought they knew about me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The afternoon sun painted the lake in shades of copper and gold, the kind of light that made you believe in second chances. I had driven up from Reno specifically for this, a quiet Thanksgiving at the lake house with my parents' and brother's family. For once I thought maybe we could pretend to be normal. Maybe the holiday would soften the edges of our fractured dynamic. Maybe I could sit at a table without feeling like an afterthought in my own story. The lake house smelled of cedar and old books, a refuge I had built from the ground up with money my grandmother left specifically to me. She had seen things others missed. In her final years, she pulled me aside more than once to whisper warnings about giving too much, about people who take until there's nothing left. At the time I smiled and nodded, thinking she was just being protective. Now I understood she had been trying to save me from this exact moment. I stepped onto the back deck with a fresh pot of coffee, planning to offer refills before we sat down to eat. The sliding glass door was open just enough to let in the breeze, and their voices drifted out from the living room with casual clarity. I froze mid-step, the pot heavy in my hands, as my father's voice dropped into that tone he used when making business deals. Final. Authoritative. Inarguable. Mitchell needs this place more than she does. He's got a family to think about. Jade's alone. What does she need all this space for anyway? My mother's voice chimed in, sweet and placating, the way she always smoothed over my father's harshness. We raised her to understand family comes first. She'll see reason. She always does. And then Mitchell, my younger brother, the golden child who had sailed through life on charm and empty promises, laughed. A short, dismissive sound that told me everything I needed to know about how little I mattered. If she fights it, we'll just remind her how much we've sacrificed for her over the years. Guilt works wonders. The mug tumbled from my hand before I could stop it. The crash echoed across the deck, porcelain exploding into a dozen jagged pieces. I stared down at the wreckage, watching coffee seep between the wooden slats, and felt something inside me crack just as cleanly. For a heartbeat, everything went silent. Then my mother's voice called out, honey sweet and concerned. Jade, are you all right out there? I crouched down, gathering the broken pieces with shaking hands, buying myself seconds to reconstruct my face into something neutral. A shard bit into my thumb, drawing a thin line of blood, but I barely felt it. The pain inside was so much sharper. When I stood and turned toward the door, I was smiling. Not a real smile, but the kind I had perfected over decades of being overlooked. The kind that said everything's fine even when the world was ending. They were all watching me as I stepped back inside. My father sat in the leather armchair he'd claimed the moment he arrived, legs crossed, utterly relaxed. My mother perched on the sofa, hands folded in her lap like a saint in a painting. Mitchell leaned against the fireplace mantel, grinning that easy grin that had gotten him out of trouble his entire life. His wife Vanessa scrolled through her phone, probably editing another post about their picture-perfect existence. The twins were in the corner, building something with blocks, oblivious. I just dropped a mug, I said lightly, holding up my bleeding thumb as evidence. Clumsy me. My mother stood immediately, concern flooding her features, reaching for my hand. Oh sweetheart, let me see that. But I pulled away gently, wrapping my thumb in a napkin. It's nothing. Just a scratch. I'll clean it up. As I walked toward the kitchen, I felt their eyes on my back. Measuring. Calculating. Assuming. They thought I hadn't heard. They thought I would bend, as I always had, under the weight of their expectations and manipulations. They thought I was still the girl who absorbed every slight, every dismissal, every moment of being second choice, and swallowed it down with a smile. They had no idea that girl died the moment that mug shattered. That evening, after the strained Thanksgiving dinner where I played my part flawlessly, after they left with hugs and hollow promises to see me soon, I sat alone on the deck as darkness swallowed the mountains. The lake stretched out before me, black and infinite, reflecting nothing. I wrapped myself in a blanket and let my mind drift backward through the years I had spent trying to earn a place in my own family. When I turned 9, I wanted a birthday party like the ones Mitchell always had. Nothing extravagant, just a few friends, some decorations, maybe a cake from the bakery instead of a box mix. My mother had sighed, looked at me with tired eyes, and said we needed to save money for Mitchell's soccer equipment. He had potential, she explained. Opportunities we couldn't waste. My birthday came and went with a card on the kitchen counter and leftover takeout. Mitchell's party 3 months later had a bounce house, a magician, and 40 guests. In high school, I made the honor roll every semester. Straight A's, AP classes, editor of the school newspaper. I brought home awards and certificates that my mother tucked into a drawer without comment. Meanwhile, Mitchell barely scraped by with C's, but when he made the varsity baseball team, my father bought a trophy case and mounted it in the living room. My achievements were expected. His were celebrated. When I graduated college, I walked across that stage with summa cum laude honors and scanned the audience for familiar faces. The seat I had reserved for my family sat empty. They were helping Mitchell move into his first apartment after dropping out of his 3rd attempt at community college. When I called, my mother said they lost track of time. She promised they were proud of me. The words felt like coins tossed to a beggar, hollow and insufficient. I bought this lake house 3 years ago with money my grandmother left me in her will. She had been specific in her instructions. The inheritance was mine alone, not to be shared or borrowed or gilt away. My father was furious when the will was read, demanding to know why she would create division in the family. But my grandmother had always seen clearly. She watched them prioritize Mitchell for years. She watched me fade into the background of my own life. And she made sure I would have something they couldn't take. Except now they were trying anyway. The lake wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and cold water. I pulled the blanket tighter and felt something shift inside me. For 32 years, I had believed my worth was tied to their approval. I had spent decades trying to be good enough, helpful enough, invisible enough to avoid their disappointment. But sitting there in the dark, I finally understood the truth. Nothing I did would ever be enough because they had never intended to see me as equal. I was a resource, a backup plan, a safety net for their favored son. And if I didn't act now, they would take the one thing I had built entirely on my own. The next morning Mitchell called. His voice was bright and casual, the way it always was when he wanted something. Hey sis, I've been thinking. You've got all that space up there. And Vanessa and I have been talking about giving the boys a real childhood experience. You know, nature, fresh air away from the city chaos. His tone was rehearsed like he'd practiced this speech. We're thinking maybe we could stay with you for a while. Just until we get back on our feet. Real estate market's been tough, and with the twins in school, expenses are killing us. I stood in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, staring at my reflection in the window. For a moment I saw the old version of myself. The one who would have stammered out an excuse, felt guilty, maybe even said yes just to avoid conflict. But that woman was gone. In her place stood someone harder. Someone who had heard the truth and decided to stop pretending. I let the silence stretch. Let him fill it with more justifications and promises. It wouldn't be forever. Just a few months. The boys would love it. Vanessa could help with cooking and cleaning. We'd barely be in your way. When he finally ran out of words, I took a slow breath and let my voice come out soft. Careful. Like I was considering it. That's a big ask, Mitchell. I need to think about it. Relief flooded his voice. Of course. Take your time. But just so you know, Mom and Dad think it's a great idea. They said you'd understand. Family helps family, right? The words landed like stones. There it was. The script they'd already written. The outcome they'd already decided. My answer was supposed to be a formality, a rubber stamp on their plan. Let me talk to them, I said quietly. Maybe we can figure something out. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Enthusiasm in his response made my stomach turn. You're the best, Jade. Seriously. The boys are going to be so excited. Vanessa's already looking at furniture for their room. We'll make it work, I promise. After I hung up, I stood motionless in the kitchen for a long time. Through the window, the lake sparkled under morning sun, deceptively peaceful. Inside me, something cold and clear took shape. They thought I would fold. They thought guilt and obligation would do their work for them. But I had spent too many years being the person they wanted me to be. It was time to become someone else entirely. That afternoon, I drove to my parents' house in Sacramento under the pretense of discussing Mitchell's proposal. The house looked exactly as it always had, a sprawling suburban fortress where appearances mattered more than truth. My mother answered the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, ushering me inside with the kind of warmth that felt like performance art. We settled in the formal dining room, a space reserved for important conversations and holiday meals. My father sat at the head of the table, naturally, with my mother to his right. I took the seat across from them, folding my hands on the polished wood, and waited. "Your brother told you about the living arrangement," my father began. Not a question. A statement. I nodded. "He did." My mother leaned forward, her expression soft and pleading. "We know it's a lot to ask, sweetheart. But Mitchell's going through a difficult time. The market's been brutal for real estate agents. He's got a family to support. And that lake house has so much room. You're there alone most of the time anyway." I let them talk. Let them lay out their reasoning, their justifications, their carefully constructed arguments about family obligation and shared resources. My father mentioned how much they had sacrificed raising 2 children. My mother brought up all the times they had been there for me, conveniently rewriting history to include support that had never actually existed. When they finished, they looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to crumble under the weight of their narrative. Instead, I smiled. "Okay, if it helps Mitchell and the boys, we can make it work." The relief that washed over them was almost comical. My mother reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "Oh honey, you're doing such a good thing. This is what family means." My father nodded approvingly. "I knew you'd see reason, Jade. You've always been the sensible one." I excused myself to use the bathroom, and on the way back, I noticed paper spread across my father's desk in his study. Curiosity pulled me closer. The documents were legal forms, dense with language I recognized from buying the lake house, property transfer agreements, custodial arrangements. My name appeared multiple times, and beside each instance, someone had practiced my signature. Over and over, in margins and on scratch paper, they had rehearsed forging my handwriting. My vision blurred at the edges. This wasn't just a request. It was a takeover. They had already drawn up the paperwork to transfer ownership, planning to present it as something I had agreed to. A temporary arrangement that would become permanent once their names were on the deed. My father appeared in the doorway, and for a split second, something flickered across his face. Not quite guilt. More like irritation at being caught. "Just getting the logistics sorted," he said smoothly, stepping into the room to gather the papers. "You know how these things work. Better to have everything official. Protects everyone involved." His voice was so calm, so reasonable, as if forgery and theft were simply prudent planning. I nodded slowly, keeping my expression blank. "That makes sense. You're right. Better to be prepared." I left my parents' house with my hands shaking so badly, I had to grip the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The 2.5-hour drive back to the lake house passed in a blur of highway lights and racing thoughts. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun had set completely, leaving only the pale glow of the moon reflecting off the water. I sat in the car for 20 minutes, engine cooling, staring at the house I had worked so hard to afford. Every beam, every window, every piece of furniture inside represented years of saving, of careful planning, of building something that was entirely mine. And they wanted to take it. Not borrow it. Not share it. Take it. I had seen the evidence with my own eyes. Those weren't casual notes or preliminary sketches. They were calculated forgeries, practiced signatures, legal documents drafted to transfer my property into their control. The temporary arrangement Mitchell had proposed on the phone was a lie, a soft opening to a predetermined ending. Once they moved in, once their belongings filled the rooms and their names appeared on enough paperwork, removing them would require lawyers, courts, and money I didn't have unlimited access to. They were counting on my compliance, on my lifelong pattern of yielding to avoid conflict. Inside the house, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood at the kitchen counter, letting the silence settle around me. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel the familiar weight of guilt pressing down on my shoulders. Instead, I felt something sharp and clean cutting through the fog I had lived in for decades. Clarity. They had miscalculated. They had assumed I would remain the person I had always been, the accommodating daughter who absorbed every slight and moved on. But discovering those forged documents had burned away any remaining loyalty I felt. Family was supposed to protect each other. What they were doing wasn't protection. It was predation. I pulled out my laptop and began researching. Property law. Squatters' rights. Transfer procedures. Fraud prevention. The more I read, the clearer my path became. If they had already drafted the paperwork, they would move quickly. Mitchell's phone call had been the opening gambit, designed to secure my verbal agreement before presenting the legal documents. They would frame it as helping me organize the arrangement, making it official for tax purposes or insurance reasons. And if I hesitated, they would apply pressure. Guilt. Obligation. Family duty. All the tools they had used on me my entire life. But I wasn't going to give them the chance. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove back down the mountain to Incline Village. There was a coffee shop I frequented called Elevation Coffee Roasters, a small place with local art on the walls and baristas who knew regular customers by name. I ordered a latte and took a seat by the window, watching tourists and locals pass by on the sidewalk. I wasn't there for the coffee. I was waiting. Brandon Cole walked in 20 minutes later, dressed in a business casual combination that suggested he had come from a meeting. He was a real estate developer who had made his fortune buying distressed properties and turning them into profitable ventures. I knew him peripherally through community events and the Lakeshore Owners Association. More importantly, I knew he had history with Mitchell. 3 years ago, Mitchell had convinced Brandon to partner on a property flip. Mitchell handled the real estate side, finding the property and managing the sale. Brandon provided the capital and construction oversight. The project should have been straightforward, but Mitchell cut corners, hired unreliable contractors, and pocketed money meant for materials. When the deal fell apart, Brandon lost over $60,000. Mitchell blamed the market, the contractors' bad timing, anything but his own negligence and dishonesty. Brandon had been furious, but without clear proof of fraud, he had no legal recourse. He absorbed the loss and made it clear he wanted nothing to do with Mitchell Hartley ever again. I waved him over, and he approached with a curious smile. Jade, right? From the HOA meetings? I nodded and gestured to the empty chair. Do you have a few minutes? I need to talk to you about something important. He sat, eyebrows raised with interest. His coffee arrived, and I waited until the barista moved away before speaking. This is going to sound strange, but I need your help, and I think it might benefit both of us. Over the next 30 minutes, I laid out the situation. I told him about Mitchell's request, my parents' plan, the forged documents I had seen. I explained that they intended to move into my lake house under the guise of temporary family support, then use fabricated paperwork to claim partial or full ownership. Brandon listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. Your brother is a piece of work, he said quietly. I'm not surprised he's trying this. The question is, what do you want to do about it? I met his eyes. I want to sell the lake house. Quickly. Quietly. Before they have a chance to move in or file any fraudulent claims. And I want to sell it to someone who won't be manipulated or intimidated if my family comes knocking. Someone who has every reason to stand firm against Mitchell Hartley. Brandon's smile was slow and deliberate. You want to sell it to me? Exactly. Market value. Clean transaction. No drama. You get a property you've had your eye on, I get out from under a nightmare, and Mitchell gets nothing. He considered this, fingers drumming on the table. The lake house was worth every penny of its $515,000 price tag. The location alone made it a valuable asset, and Brandon knew it. But he also knew I was offering him more than real estate. I was offering him a chance to ensure Mitchell Hartley couldn't benefit from yet another scheme. I'll do it, he said finally. But we need to move fast. If they've already drafted transfer documents, they're probably planning to present them within the next few weeks, maybe sooner if they think you're agreeable. I can have my attorney draw up a clean sale agreement by tomorrow. We close within 2 weeks. Cash offer, no contingencies. You keep this completely confidential until the sale is finalized. Once the deed transfers to me, your family has no claim, legal or otherwise. Relief flooded through me, so intense I felt lightheaded. Thank you. You have no idea what this means. He shook his head. Think I do. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry your family put you in this position. Nobody should have to protect themselves from the people who are supposed to protect them. We shook hands and I left the coffee shop feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The plan was in motion. All I had to do now was maintain the performance. Let them believe I was cooperating. Let them think their manipulation was working. The longer they felt secure in their scheme, the more devastating the truth would be when it finally landed. Over the next 2 weeks, I played my role flawlessly. Mitchell called every few days with updates, his voice bright with excitement. Vanessa had picked out paint colors for the twins' room. They were looking into schools in the area. He had a few clients interested in properties nearby, so staying at the lake house would actually help his business. Each conversation made my stomach turn, but I responded with carefully measured enthusiasm. That sounds great. I'm sure the boys will love it here. We'll make it work. My mother invited me to lunch, just the two of us, at her favorite restaurant in Sacramento. Over salads and iced tea, she talked about how proud she was that I was stepping up for Mitchell. How this was the kind of thing that defined real family. How my grandmother, despite her stubbornness about the inheritance, would have approved of me sharing my blessings. I smiled and nodded, letting her rewrite history to suit her narrative. Inside, I counted down the days until the sale closed. My father sent me an email with the subject line Family Agreement Draft. Attached were the documents I had seen on his desk, now polished and official looking. The language was deliberately vague, describing a custodial arrangement where I would grant Mitchell and his family use of the property for an indefinite period. Buried in the legalese were clauses that would give them increasing rights over time, eventually allowing them to claim ownership through adverse possession or some equally manipulative legal loophole. A note at the bottom, written in my father's curt style, read, "Look this over and sign where indicated. We'll make it official over the holidays." Simple and clean. I printed the document, read every word 3 times, and felt my resolve harden into something unbreakable. They had spent months planning this, drawing up paperwork, coordinating their story, preparing to rob me in broad daylight while calling it family support. And they had done it all with the absolute confidence that I would comply, that I would sign away my home because confrontation made me uncomfortable, that I was still the 9-year-old girl who accepted a forgotten birthday without complaint. I replied to my father's email with a single line, "Received. We'll review and get back to you soon." Then I deleted the attachment and went back to monitoring the sale timeline. Brandon's attorney had been efficient. The title company expedited the process. By the end of the 2nd week, every document was signed, every fund transferred, every legal requirement satisfied. The lake house at 2847 Lakeshore Boulevard no longer belonged to Jade Hartley. It belonged to Brandon Cole. And there was nothing my family could do to change that. The deed transfer recorded on a Thursday afternoon. I received confirmation from the title company via email, along with a scanned copy of the finalized documents. I saved everything to a secure cloud drive, then made physical copies that I stored in a safety deposit box. Brandon sent a brief message. "It's done. Keys are officially mine. Good luck with what comes next." I thanked him and sat for a long moment, staring at the confirmation email. It was real. I had done it. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for them to walk into it. That evening, Vanessa posted on Instagram a photo of her and Mitchell standing in front of a U-Haul truck, the twins grinning between them. The caption read, "Big changes ahead. New adventure starting this weekend. Taking the family to our lake house for a fresh start. Grateful for family who supports us." The post had already accumulated dozens of likes and comments. Friends and acquaintances congratulating them, asking about the location, praising their picture-perfect life. My mother shared it on Facebook with her own edition. "So proud of my children and the love that keeps us strong. Family is everything." I sat on the couch in my small Reno apartment, the place I had kept as a backup even after buying the lake house, and felt a smile tug at my lips. They were so confident, so certain. They had broadcast their plan to everyone they knew. building a public narrative of family unity and mutual support. They had no idea they were advertising their own humiliation. Every share, every like, every congratulatory comment was another witness to the disaster that was coming. I liked Vanessa's post. A simple, silent thumbs up that my mother would see and interpret as approval. Let them think I was on board. Let them believe the plan was proceeding smoothly. The higher they climbed on their platform of lies, the farther they would fall. Saturday morning arrived cold and bright, the kind of winter day where the sky is painfully blue and the air bites at exposed skin. I woke early, made coffee, and checked my phone. Mitchell had sent a text at 6 in the morning. Heading up today. Should be there by noon. Thanks again for being so cool about this. You're the best. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I spent the morning cleaning my apartment, organizing files, doing mundane tasks that kept my hands busy while my mind raced. Part of me wanted to drive up to the lake house, to be there when they arrived, to see their faces when the truth revealed itself. But I had decided against it. This wasn't about confrontation. It wasn't about standing in front of them and delivering some dramatic speech. This was about consequences. About them finally facing the reality that I was not a resource to be exploited. And I didn't need to be present for that lesson. The situation would teach itself. At 11:30 my phone rang. My mother. I let it go to voicemail. She called again immediately. Then my father. Then Mitchell. I silenced the phone and set it face down on the coffee table. Whatever was happening at the lake house, I didn't need to hear about it in real time. I would get the full story eventually. For now, I just needed to let it unfold. An hour later, I finally checked my messages. There were 8 missed calls and a string of increasingly frantic texts. From my mother, Jade, call me immediately. There's been some kind of mistake. From my father, what the hell is going on? The keys don't work. From Mitchell, are you seriously doing this? Call me right now. And finally from Vanessa, this is cruel and you know it. Those boys are standing in the cold because of you. I opened my laptop and navigated to the Lake Tahoe Homeowners Network Facebook group, a community page where locals shared news, recommendations, and the occasional drama. Someone had already posted about the scene at my lake house. The post included photos. A U-Haul truck parked in the driveway. Mitchell and Vanessa standing on the front porch, surrounded by boxes and furniture. The twins sitting on a cooler, looking confused. And in every photo, the growing crowd of neighbors who had stopped to watch. The comments section beneath the photos was already filling up with speculation. Some people recognized Mitchell from his real estate work. Others wondered if this was a moving day gone wrong. And a few locals who knew me personally were asking what was happening. One comment stood out. Isn't that the Hartley property? I thought Jade lived there alone. Why are there so many people trying to move in? The question hung there unanswered, while more neighbors added their observations and theories. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a video call from Mitchell. I declined it and watched as he immediately tried again. Declined. He sent a text in all capitals. Answer your phone. We are standing out here like idiots. I set the phone aside and made myself another cup of coffee, taking my time with the kettle, measuring the grounds with deliberate precision. The ritual steadied me. Outside my apartment window, ordinary people went about their Saturday errands, completely unaware of the small earthquake happening 2 hours north in the mountains. I finally picked up my phone and called Brandon. He answered on the second ring, and I could hear the smile in his voice before he even spoke. I take it they've arrived. I confirmed, keeping my tone neutral. How bad is it? He laughed, a sound entirely devoid of sympathy. Let me put it this way. They showed up with a moving truck, about a dozen boxes already unloaded on the lawn, and your brother spent 15 minutes trying different keys in the lock before he started pounding on the door. I got a call from my property manager about 30 minutes ago. Apparently several neighbors contacted her asking why there were people trying to break into my house. My house. The word settled over me like a warm blanket. It wasn't mine anymore, which meant it was completely protected from their schemes. Brandon continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone. I'm heading up there now. Should arrive in about 20 minutes. I'll handle this directly. You don't need to be involved unless you want to be. I thought about it for a long moment. Part of me wanted to be there, to watch their faces as the reality crashed down around them. But another part, the part that had finally learned to protect itself, knew that distance was power. Let them scramble. Let them panic. Let them realize I was nowhere to be found when they needed me to fix their disaster. Stay away, I told him. Let them figure it out on their own. But document everything. I want records of exactly what they say and do. Brandon agreed and promised to send me updates. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and began drafting a response to the family group chat that had been exploding with messages for the past hour. I didn't rush. Every word needed to be precise, every sentence carefully constructed. This wasn't anger speaking. This was strategy. The message I finally sent was simple and devastating. I'm sorry you're having trouble with the keys. The reason they don't work is because I sold the lake house 2 weeks ago. The new owner took possession on Thursday. I didn't mention it because every time I tried to discuss the property, I was told what I should do with it rather than being asked what I wanted. I hope you can understand that after finding forged signatures and fraudulent transfer documents in Dad's office, I decided to protect my investment the only way I could. I wish you all the best in finding suitable housing. The property is no longer mine to offer. I hit send and immediately turned off my phone. The silence that followed was glorious. No buzzing, no ringing. No desperate attempts to reach me and demand explanations. Just pure crystalline quiet. I took my coffee to the balcony and sat watching the city below, feeling lighter than I had in years. They would be reading that message now, their minds racing to process what it meant. The forged documents mentioned in front of everyone in the family group chat. The sale finalized and irreversible. The casual tone that made it clear I had been planning this for weeks while smiling to their faces. Everything they thought they knew about me had just been incinerated. Hours passed before I turned my phone back on. And when I did, the screen lit up with more notifications than I could count. The family chat had erupted into chaos. My father demanded I call him immediately and explain myself. My mother sent tearful messages about family loyalty and how hurt she was by my deception. Mitchell's messages were pure rage, barely coherent strings of accusations and threats. Vanessa had sent a long paragraph about how I had traumatized the twins, how they had cried watching their belongings being loaded back into the U-Haul, how I would regret this betrayal for the rest of my life. But there were other messages too. Messages from extended family members, cousins and aunts and uncles I barely heard from anymore, asking what was going on and whether the story about forged documents was true. My father's sister, Aunt Caroline, sent a private message. Your father just called me trying to explain this situation and none of it makes sense. Did they really try to forge your signature? Several family friends had reached out as well, people who had seen the social media posts and then the dramatic collapse, asking if I was okay and whether I needed anything. The narrative was already shifting, spreading beyond my immediate family into the wider circle of relatives and acquaintances who had watched our dynamic for years. Some of them had probably suspected the imbalance, the way Mitchell was favored and I was sidelined, but family politics kept them silent. Now the silence was breaking. Now people were asking questions. I responded to Aunt Caroline first. Yes, I found transfer documents with my forged signature at their house. They planned to move Mitchell in and eventually take ownership. I protected myself the only way I could. Her response came within minutes. I believe you. Your father has always had a blind spot when it comes to Mitchell. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. The validation from someone inside the family structure loosened something in my chest. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't cruel. I was surviving. Over the next few days, Brandon sent me updates as promised. He had arrived at the lake house that Saturday afternoon to find my family still there. Mitchell arguing with neighbors who had gathered to watch the spectacle. When Brandon identified himself as the new owner and showed his documentation, Mitchell had tried to claim there was some mistake, that I had promised them the house, that there must be a way to work this out. Brandon shut it down immediately. The property belongs to me. You have no claim, legal or otherwise. I'm going to need you to remove your belongings from my lawn and vacate the premises. According to Brandon, my father had tried a different approach, pulling him aside to man negotiate some kind of arrangement. Surely we can come to an understanding. My daughter made a rash decision. If you give us some time, we can straighten this out and make it worth your while. Brandon's response had been ice cold. Your daughter made a smart business decision by selling to me. And I'm aware of your history with property manipulation, so there's nothing to discuss. Please leave before I call the sheriff. The mention of calling law enforcement had finally broken through their denial. They loaded everything back into the U-Haul, a process that took nearly 2 hours while neighbors watched and whispered. Vanessa had cried openly, making a show of her distress for anyone watching. The twins kept asking questions their parents couldn't answer. And through it all, Mitchell's face had been a mask of humiliated rage. His jaw clenched so tight Brandon said he looked like he might shatter his own teeth. The story spread through the Lake Tahoe community like wildfire. The Facebook group post accumulated hundreds of comments, with locals sharing their own encounters with Mitchell's questionable business practices. One person mentioned he had overcharged them on a property assessment. Another said he had tried to poach their listing by going directly to the buyer behind their back. A former client detailed how Mitchell had promised renovations that never materialized, then blamed everyone but himself when the sale fell through. The pattern was clear and damning. My brother had burned bridges all over the region, and now those people were watching his public humiliation with something between justice and schadenfreude. Vanessa's response was to post a video. It appeared on Sunday evening, filmed in what looked like a hotel room. She sat on the edge of the bed, makeup smudged from crying, hair pulled into a messy ponytail. Behind her, I could see Mitchell pacing and the twins playing on tablets to keep them quiet. The video was titled Family Betrayal and it was designed to gut me. She spoke directly into the camera, her voice breaking with practiced emotion. I never thought I would have to make a video like this, but I need people to know the truth about what happened yesterday. We were supposed to be moving into a beautiful lake house, a place where my children could grow up surrounded by nature and family. Jade, Mitchell's sister, told us we could stay there. She agreed to help us. We planned everything around that promise. We gave up our apartment. We packed our entire lives. And when we arrived, ready to start this new chapter, we found out she had sold the property out from under us without telling anyone. No warning. No conversation. Just cold betrayal. She paused for effect, wiping her eyes. My boys stood in the freezing cold yesterday asking why their aunt didn't want them anymore. How do you explain that to 7-year-olds? How do you tell your children that family doesn't mean what you thought it meant? Mitchell and I are heartbroken. We trusted her. We believed in family. And this is what we get. The video ended with her staring into the camera, a perfect picture of wounded innocence. Within an hour, the video had been shared across multiple platforms. Friends and followers flooded the comments with sympathy. How awful. I can't believe someone would do that to family. Those poor children. What kind of person betrays their own blood like that? The narrative Vanessa crafted was powerful because it was simple. Victim and villain. Innocent family destroyed by selfish sister. No complexity, no context, just pure emotional manipulation. I watched the video 3 times, studying every detail. The calculated tears. The mention of the children. The way she framed my silence as coldness rather than self-protection. It was masterful, really. And it was exactly what I had anticipated. I had known they would try to control the story, to paint themselves as victims and me as the villain. That was why I had spent the past 2 weeks preparing my response. I opened the folder on my laptop where I had saved everything. Photos of the forged signatures I had found in my father's office, taken surreptitiously with my phone when I discovered them. Screenshots of the property transfer documents my father had emailed me, highlighting the clauses designed to strip my ownership. Text messages from Mitchell dating back months where he talked about moving into the lake house like it was already decided. Emails from my mother discussing paint colors and furniture arrangements before they had even asked my permission. And finally, a detailed timeline I had written out documenting years of being overlooked, dismissed, and deprioritized in favor of my brother. I compiled everything into a single document and wrote an introduction. For those who have seen the video my sister-in-law posted, I want to provide context that was conveniently left out. This isn't a story about betrayal. It's a story about protection. What follows is documentation of a systematic attempt to take my property through manipulation and fraud. I'm sharing this not for sympathy but for truth. You can decide for yourselves what really happened. I posted it to Facebook, making it public so anyone could read it. Then I shared it in the Lake Tahoe Homeowners Network group, in my college alumni group, and in the community pages for both Incline Village and Sacramento. I tagged no one, named no one directly in the post itself. The documentation spoke for itself. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 20 minutes, the post had been shared 50 times. Within an hour, it had spread to hundreds of people. Comments poured in, but these were different from the ones on Vanessa's video. These were people reading the evidence, seeing the forged signatures, understanding the timeline. The narrative flipped so fast it must have given Vanessa whiplash. This is fraud. Plain and simple. Jade had every right to protect herself. I remember Jade's graduation. She walked alone. Now I understand why she keeps her distance. Those documents are damning. The parents tried to steal from their own daughter. Anyone defending this family needs to read the evidence. This isn't about being cruel. This is about survival. Former classmates emerged from years of silence to share their own observations. I always noticed how differently they treated Jade and Mitchell. She worked twice as hard for half the recognition. One of my mother's church friends commented, "I love Patricia. But reading this breaks my heart. No parent should do this to their child." Even people who didn't know me personally weighed in after reading the documentation. The forged signatures alone are criminal. The fact that these are her parents makes it worse, not better. Vanessa's video, which had seemed so powerful just hours before, was now being dissected and criticized in hundreds of comment threads. People compared her claims to my evidence and found her story lacking. Screenshots of my documentation appeared beneath her video with captions like, "This is what she left out, and here's the real story." Influencers and bloggers who had initially shared her video sympathetically began deleting their posts or adding updates acknowledging they hadn't known the full context. The tide of public opinion shifted completely, and it shifted against my family with a force I hadn't fully anticipated. My father tried to control the damage with a statement posted to his own Facebook page. He wrote in his typical authoritative tone, the voice of a man accustomed to having the final word, "There has been a misunderstanding regarding a family matter that should have remained private. My daughter has misinterpreted some preliminary documents and made hasty decisions based on incomplete information. We love Jade and always have. We regret that a simple miscommunication has been blown out of proportion. We ask for privacy as we work through this as a family." The response was brutal. People who had read my evidence called him out immediately. Forged signatures aren't a miscommunication. Those documents weren't preliminary, they were fraud. Jade provided proof, you provided excuses. My father's friends, people from his professional network and social circles, began quietly distancing themselves. Some unfriended him outright. Others simply stopped engaging with his posts. In a community like Sacramento, where reputation mattered and word spread quickly through churches and country clubs and business associations, the damage was catastrophic. My mother's approach was different. She sent me a private message, her words dripping with the kind of gentle manipulation she had perfected over decades. "Sweetheart, I don't understand why you felt the need to make this public. We could have discussed this privately. You've humiliated your father and broken your brother's heart. Mitchell is talking about leaving the state because he can't face people here anymore. The twins are confused and upset. I know you're angry, but this cruelty isn't like you. Please, can we talk? Can we find a way to fix this? I know we made mistakes, but destroying the family can't be the answer." I read her message 3 times, feeling for any trace of the guilt she was trying to invoke. There was none. The woman who wrote those words had watched my father forge my signature and said nothing. She had helped plan the takeover of my property and called it family unity. She had spent 32 years prioritizing Mitchell's comfort over my existence, and never once questioned whether that was fair. Her appeal to privacy was really an appeal to silence. She wanted me to absorb this violation quietly, the way I had absorbed everything else. I responded with a single sentence. I didn't destroy this family. I protected myself from people who were trying to rob me. Then I blocked her number. The finality of it felt like closing a door that had been stuck open my entire life, letting in cold wind and unwanted visitors. Now it was shut, locked, and I was the only one with the key. Mitchell's reaction was the most volatile. He created a burner account to send me messages after I blocked his main number. The messages ranged from rage to bargaining to threats. "You just ruined my career. Nobody in this town will work with me now. I hope you're happy. Dad is having chest pains from the stress you caused. If something happens to him, it's on you. We can still fix this if you just admit you overreacted. Transfer the house back and we'll forget this happened. You're going to regret this for the rest of your miserable life. I've got lawyers looking into this. You won't get away with stealing family property. I saved every message and forwarded them to Brandon's attorney with a brief note. For the record, in case they escalate. The attorney responded within an hour. These messages constitute harassment. I'm documenting everything. If they continue or intensify, we can pursue a restraining order. Let me know if you feel unsafe. The professional reassurance steadied me. I wasn't alone in this. I had legal protection documentation, and people who understood what was happening. The fallout continued to spread through the extended family network like cracks in ice. My father's sister Caroline became unexpectedly vocal, posting her own statement in the family group chat that included cousins, aunts, uncles, and second cousins I barely remembered. I've stayed quiet about family dynamics for years, but this situation demands honesty. I've watched Richard prioritize Mitchell over Jade their entire lives. I've seen it at every holiday, every celebration, every family gathering. What Jade did wasn't cruel, it was necessary. She protected herself from people who were actively trying to defraud her. I'm ashamed that it took public exposure for some of you to see what's been obvious for decades. The message detonated whatever fragile unity remained. Some relatives rushed to defend my parents, claiming Caroline was exaggerating or taking sides unfairly. Others admitted they had noticed the favoritism but hadn't felt it was their place to intervene. A few cousins I hadn't spoken to in years reached out privately to say they believed me, that they had always thought I was treated unfairly, that they were glad I had finally stood up for myself. The family fractured along unexpected lines, with allegiances forming and dissolving based on who was willing to acknowledge the truth versus who preferred the comfortable fiction we had all maintained. My parents' social standing deteriorated rapidly. At church, where they had been prominent members for over 20 years, people began avoiding them during fellowship hour. The pastor, a kind man who had known them for ages, reportedly suggested they might benefit from family counseling and taking a step back from leadership roles. My mother's book club stopped inviting her. My father's golf partners found reasons to play other courses. Invitations to parties and social gatherings dried up. In their suburban Sacramento community, where appearances and reputation were currency, they had become pariahs. The practical consequences were equally harsh. Mitchell lost 2 major clients within a week, both citing his unprofessional conduct and the concerns raised by former clients online as reasons for terminating their contracts. His broker received multiple complaints and began distancing the company from him, removing him from featured agent listings and prime assignments. Vanessa's aspirational lifestyle blog, which had never been particularly successful, lost what modest following it had. Sponsors dropped out. Collaboration offers evaporated. Her comment sections filled with criticism about her manipulation tactics and fake victim narrative. Within a month, Mitchell and Vanessa's marriage showed signs of serious strain. Vanessa posted cryptic quotes about trust and partnership, the kind of vague social media content that signaled trouble without naming it directly. Mitchell stopped appearing in her photos. Friends who knew them reported arguments and tension, the kind that erupts when pressure cracks the foundation. By February, Vanessa had filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. She took the twins and moved back to her parents' house in Nevada, leaving Mitchell alone in a cheap rental apartment in Sacramento. My parents faced their own reckoning. The suburban house they had lived in for 30 years, the house where they had thrown elaborate parties for Mitchell and forgotten my birthdays, went on the market. They had no choice. Their savings had been depleted by years of bailing Mitchell out of bad business deals and failed ventures. The legal consultation fees they racked up trying to find some way to challenge the lake house sale ate through what remained. The house sold below asking price to buyers who negotiated hard, sensing desperation. My parents moved into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a complex near the highway, where the walls were thin and the parking lot flooded when it rained. I learned all of this through the grapevine, through relatives and former neighbors who kept me updated despite my distance. I had moved to Brookings, Oregon, a small coastal town where nobody knew my history and the ocean drowned out every other sound. My apartment was modest, perched on a hill with a view of the Pacific. I worked remotely for a tech company based in Seattle, My skills in data analysis more valuable than ever in the expanding market. My days followed a peaceful rhythm. Coffee at dawn, watching the waves, work in a sunlit corner of my living room, evening walks on the beach where the sand stretched for miles. The silence in my life was profound. No phone calls demanding emotional labor. No text messages asking for favors disguised as family togetherness. No holidays spent performing gratitude for people who saw me as an inconvenience. I had worried that cutting off my family would leave me lonely, that I would miss them despite everything. But what I discovered was that I had been lonely my entire life while surrounded by them. Now, alone by choice, I felt more connected to myself than I ever had. I made friends slowly in Brookings, the owner of the coffee shop where I became a regular. A woman who ran a used bookstore and shared my taste in mystery novels. A retired teacher who walked the same beach path every morning and started timing her walks to coincide with mine. These relationships were simple and honest, built on genuine connection rather than obligation. When they asked about my family, I said we were estranged and left it at that. Most people respected the boundary without needing details. 6 months after the lake house confrontation, I received a letter. Not an email or text, but an actual physical letter forwarded from my old Reno address. The return address was my parents' apartment. I held it for a long time, feeling its weight before finally opening it. The letter was from my mother, written in her careful cursive on cream-colored stationery. Dear Jade, I've started this letter 100 times and never found the right words. Your father says I shouldn't write at all, that you've made your choice and we should respect it. But I'm your mother, and I can't let this silence continue without at least trying. I won't make excuses for what happened. We were wrong to plan moving Mitchell in without your full enthusiastic consent. We were wrong to draft those documents. Your father was wrong to practice your signature. I see that now, though it's taken me time to accept it. I think we told ourselves we were helping Mitchell, that family was supposed to support each other through hard times. But we forgot that you're family too. We forgot you have needs and boundaries and dreams that matter just as much as your brothers. Maybe we forgot that a long time ago. The letter continued for 2 more pages. She wrote about how they had lost their home, how Mitchell's marriage had failed, how the community they had built over decades had crumbled. She acknowledged, with more honesty than I expected, that they had always favored Mitchell and that it wasn't fair. She admitted she didn't know how to fix what was broken, if it even could be fixed. She ended with a simple request. If you can find it in your heart to forgive us someday, we'd like the chance to know you again. Not the daughter we tried to make you, but the person you actually are. We're sorry, Jade. We're so deeply sorry. I read the letter twice, then set it aside and made tea. Outside my window, fog rolled in from the ocean, thick and gray, blurring the line between water and sky. I thought about forgiveness, about whether it was something I owed them or something I could choose to give. I thought about the version of me that would have read that letter and immediately called, eager to rebuild, willing to overlook everything for the promise of reconciliation. That version of me was gone. She had died the moment the coffee mug shattered on the lake house deck. The woman I had become understood something crucial. Forgiveness didn't require reconciliation. I could release the anger, let go of the need for them to suffer, without inviting them back into my life. Their remorse, however genuine, didn't erase 32 years of being invisible. Their apology didn't rebuild trust that had never actually existed. And their suffering, while perhaps teaching them lessons they needed to learn, wasn't my responsibility to manage or alleviate. I wrote a response, keeping it brief. Thank you for your letter. I appreciate the honesty. I don't know if forgiveness is possible right now, and I don't know if I'll ever want a relationship with any of you again. What I do know is that I'm building a life that's peaceful and mine. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done. I hope you find a way to be happy with the choices you made. Take care of yourselves. I mailed it the next day and felt nothing. Not relief, not sadness, not satisfaction. Just a quiet sense of completion, like closing a book after finishing the last page. Whatever happened with my family from this point forward was their journey, not mine. I had done what I needed to do to survive. Now I was doing what I needed to do to thrive. A year after moving to Brookings, I bought a small cottage 3 blocks from the beach. It needed work, but it was structurally sound and priced fairly. I spent weekends painting walls, refinishing hardwood floors, planting a garden in the backyard. I learned about native plants that thrived in coastal conditions. I built raised beds for vegetables and filled window boxes with flowers that bloomed even in the salt air. The cottage became mine in a way the lake house never quite had, because I claimed it entirely on my own terms. Brandon Cole called occasionally to check in. The lake house was doing well as a vacation rental, bringing in steady income and maintaining its value. He had renovated the kitchen and updated the bathrooms, improvements that increased the property's worth. Sometimes he mentioned seeing Mitchell around Sacramento, usually at a distance in grocery stores or gas stations. Mitchell always looked diminished, Brandon said. Smaller somehow. Less certain. I thanked him for the updates but didn't ask for more details. Mitchell's life was no longer connected to mine in any meaningful way. I started volunteering at a local women's shelter, helping residents with resume writing and job search strategies. Many of them were rebuilding their lives after leaving abusive situations, and I understood that particular kind of courage. The courage to walk away from what's familiar, even when it's destroying you. The courage to choose yourself when everyone tells you that's selfish. We didn't talk much about our past, these women and I. We focused on futures, on the small practical steps that led to independence and safety and peace. One afternoon, working with a woman who was trying to explain employment gaps on her resume, I realized I was talking about my own experience without naming it directly. Sometimes you have to protect yourself from people who are supposed to protect you, I said. And that gap, that time you spent getting safe, that's not a failure. That's survival. She looked at me with understanding that went deeper than words, and I saw my own reflection in her eyes. We were both rebuilding. We were both learning that strength sometimes looks like walking away. The story of what happened with my family occasionally resurfaced online. Every few months, someone would find the old posts and share them in forums about family estrangement or narcissistic parents or standing up for yourself. My carefully documented evidence became a template for others in similar situations, proof that you could protect yourself and survive the aftermath. People reached out sometimes, strangers who found my contact information and wanted to thank me for sharing my story. I appreciated their messages but rarely responded. That chapter of my life was closed, and I had no desire to keep reliving it. 2 years after the lake house sale, I received a wedding invitation. Not from family but from Brandon Cole. He had met someone, a woman who owned an art gallery in Reno, and they were getting married at a vineyard in Napa Valley. The invitation included a personal note. You changed my perspective on a lot of things. I'd be honored if you came. No pressure, just an invitation. I surprised myself by accepting. The wedding was small and beautiful, filled with people who genuinely cared about each other. During the reception, Brandon introduced me to his bride, telling her I was the reason they met, a story I didn't fully understand until he explained. After buying the lake house, he had started spending more time in the Tahoe area. He met his fiancée at an art show there, struck up a conversation, and the rest unfolded naturally. If you hadn't sold me that property, I wouldn't have been there that night. So thank you. I raised my glass in a toast and felt something warm bloom in my chest. Not happiness exactly, but contentment. A sense that the decisions I made, however painful at the time, had led to unexpected good. Not just for me but for people I cared about. The ripples of that choice extended farther than I had imagined. On the drive back to Brookings after the wedding, I took the long route through the mountains. I didn't plan to stop at Lake Tahoe, but as I approached the turnoff, curiosity pulled me in. I drove slowly through Incline Village, past familiar landmarks and streets I used to know by heart. When I reached Lakeshore Boulevard, I parked across from the lake house and sat watching the sun set over the water. The house looked different. New paint. Updated landscaping. A family was staying there, visible through the windows, laughing over dinner at the table where I used to eat alone. I felt no regret. No longing for what I had given up. Just a quiet acknowledgement that this chapter was truly over. The house that had once represented everything I worked for now represented the price of my freedom, and it was worth every penny. I drove away as the last light faded, the rearview mirror reflecting a place that no longer held any power over me. That night, back in my cottage in Brookings, I sat on my small porch listening to the ocean and thought about the question people often asked when they heard stories like mine. Do you regret cutting off your family? Do you miss them? The answer was complicated but ultimately simple. I regretted the years I spent trying to earn love from people who saw me as a resource rather than a person. I regretted not recognizing the pattern sooner. But I didn't regret protecting myself. I didn't regret choosing peace over performative family unity. And I didn't miss them, not really. I missed the idea of what a family should be, but that was a fantasy I never actually had. What I had now was better. A life built on my own terms. Relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. Space to breathe without constantly bracing for the next betrayal. I had learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is walk away from people who refuse to see your worth. And I had learned that on the other side of that terrifying choice was a kind of freedom I hadn't known was possible. The lake remained in my past, shimmering and distant. The ocean stretched before me, vast and ever-changing. I had traded one body of water for another, and in doing so I had found myself. Not the daughter they tried to mold. Not the sister who absorbed every burden. Just Jade. Finally, completely, peacefully Jade. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. The third winter in Brookings arrived with storms that battered the coastline and transformed the ocean into something wild and untamed. I watched from my cottage windows as waves crashed against the rocks, sending spray 30 feet into the air. The violence of it was oddly comforting. A reminder that nature operated on its own terms without apology or explanation. I had learned to do the same. Work had flourished in ways I hadn't anticipated. The tech company I contracted with had promoted me to a senior analyst position, recognizing the precision and dedication I brought to every project. My income had grown substantially, allowing me to make improvements to the cottage and build a financial cushion that felt like armor against future uncertainty. I contributed to retirement accounts and investment funds, securing a future that belonged only to me. Every dollar saved was a declaration of independence, proof that I could build wealth and stability without family support or intervention. The garden I had planted 2 years earlier had matured into something genuinely beautiful. Roses climbed a trellis against the back fence, their blooms resilient against the salt air. Vegetables grew in neat rows, providing fresh produce through most of the year. I had learned about companion planting and soil composition, discovering a passion for cultivation I never knew existed. There was something deeply satisfying about nurturing growth, about providing the right conditions for things to thrive. I gave my plants what they needed and they flourished. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. My social circle had expanded slowly but meaningfully. The book club I joined met monthly at the local library, a group of 8 women ranging in age from 30 to 70, who shared a love of literary fiction and honest conversation. We discussed novels, but we also discussed life, relationships, disappointments, and triumphs. When they asked about my family, I had eventually shared the broad strokes of what happened. Their responses varied, but most centered on a similar theme. Good for you for protecting yourself. No judgment, no pressure to reconcile, just simple validation that my choice had been reasonable and necessary. I had started dating someone, though calling it dating felt too formal for what it actually was. His name was Marcus Chan, a marine biologist who worked at a research station up the coast. We met at a community lecture about ocean conservation, struck up a conversation about tide pools, and discovered we walked the same beach most mornings. The relationship developed without urgency or drama, just 2 people enjoying each other's company without expectation or obligation. He knew about my estrangement and never pushed for details beyond what I offered. When I mentioned I hadn't spoken to my family in years, he simply nodded and said some families aren't safe places, and it's okay to prioritize yourself. Marcus came from a large, chaotic, genuinely loving family that gathered frequently and loudly. He invited me to a few family dinners, and I went with trepidation, expecting to feel uncomfortable or out of place. Instead, I found myself welcomed without interrogation. His parents asked about my work in my garden. His siblings included me in their conversations naturally, without making a spectacle of my presence. His nieces and nephews showed me their school projects and asked if I wanted to play board games. It was ordinary in the best possible way, and it showed me what healthy family dynamics actually looked like. The contrast was stark and sometimes painful. Watching Marcus's family interact with genuine affection and respect highlighted everything mine had lacked. But it also gave me hope that I might build something similar someday if I chose to. Not with the family I was born into, but with people I selected intentionally, people who showed up consistently and treated relationships as mutual rather than transactional. 3 years after selling the lake house, I received another letter from my mother. The envelope was thinner this time, a single page rather than several. I opened it with less hesitation than before, curious but not anxious. Her handwriting remained elegant, but the tone had shifted. She wasn't asking for anything. She was simply updating me on their lives, the way you might write to a distant acquaintance. She told me Mitchell had moved to Arizona and was working in property management, a position with steady pay and no commission pressure. He had visitation with the twins every other weekend and was reportedly trying to rebuild his relationship with them. Vanessa had remarried and seemed happy. My father's health had declined, a series of minor heart issues that required medication and lifestyle changes. They had adjusted to apartment living and found a small church community that felt welcoming. My mother ended with a simple statement: "I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness or reconciliation. I just wanted you to know we're still here and we think about you. I hope you're well, Jade. I hope you found peace." I set the letter aside and realized I felt nothing sharp or painful about its contents. Mitchell's struggles didn't bring me satisfaction. My father's health problems didn't fill me with vindictive pleasure. Their reduced circumstances didn't make me feel victorious. I had moved so far past the need for their suffering that learning about it felt neutral, like hearing news about strangers. They were becoming people I used to know rather than people who still had power over my emotions. I didn't write back immediately. Instead, I let weeks pass while I considered what I wanted from any continued contact. Did I want updates about their lives? Did I want them to know about mine? Was there any version of limited communication that wouldn't eventually require more than I was willing to give? After a month of contemplation, I sent a brief response. "Thank you for the update. I'm glad you found some stability. I'm doing well and building a good life here. I don't think regular contact is something I'm ready for, but I appreciate you respecting my boundaries. Take care." It was honest without being cruel, final without being dramatic. I suspected my mother would be disappointed that I wasn't opening the door to reconciliation, but that disappointment was hers to manage, not mine to fix. I had spent enough years managing their emotions. Now I was focused on managing my own. The volunteer work at the women's shelter had evolved into something more structured. The director approached me about developing a workshop series on financial literacy and employment readiness for residents transitioning out of the shelter. I agreed and spent several months creating curriculum, pulling from my own experience with rebuilding and self-sufficiency. The workshops covered practical skills like budgeting, resume writing, and interview preparation, but they also addressed the psychological aspects of reclaiming independence after trauma or abuse. During one session, a woman asked how you know when you're ready to trust people again after being hurt by family. The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of shared experience. I thought about it carefully before answering. I don't think it's about being ready. I think it's about choosing carefully and moving slowly. Trust isn't something you give all at once. It's something you build incrementally with people who show up consistently and respect your boundaries. And it's okay to protect yourself while you're figuring out who deserves that trust. The woman nodded, and I saw understanding in her eyes. After the workshop, she approached me privately. "Thank you for not telling me to forgive and forget. Everyone else keeps saying that like it's a moral obligation. But you're the first person who's said it's okay to protect myself first." I squeezed her hand gently. "It's more than okay. It's necessary. You can't heal in the same environment that hurt you. Sometimes distance is the only thing that makes healing possible." That conversation stayed with me for days. I realized I had become the person I needed when I was going through my own crisis. Someone who validated the difficulty of the choice without pressuring reconciliation. Someone who understood that walking away from family didn't make you broken or vindictive. It made you strong enough to prioritize your own well-being. The work at the shelter gave me purpose beyond my own healing. A way to transform pain into something that might help others navigate their own impossible situations. 4 years after moving to Brookings, I adopted a dog from the local animal shelter. A 3-year-old mixed breed named Copper, who had been surrendered by owners who could no longer care for him. He was anxious and skittish at first, flinching at sudden movements and taking weeks to warm up to physical affection. But gradually, with consistency and patience, He began to trust. He started sleeping in my bedroom instead of hiding under furniture. He wagged his tail when I came home. He learned to play and explore without constant fear. Training Copper taught me unexpected lessons about healing. Progress wasn't linear. There were setbacks and difficult days mixed in with the victories. What mattered was showing up consistently, providing safety and structure, and allowing time for wounds to close at their own pace. I couldn't force Copper to trust me any more than I could force myself to instantly recover from decades of family dysfunction. But I could create conditions where trust became possible, where healing could happen naturally rather than being demanded or rushed. Marcus and I had been together nearly 3 years when he asked about moving in together. The question didn't panic me the way it might have earlier in my recovery. I had learned to sit with uncertainty without immediately fleeing from it. We talked through logistics and boundaries, discussing what shared space would look like, and how we would maintain individual autonomy while building something together. Eventually, we decided he would move into the cottage, splitting expenses and responsibilities in a way that felt equitable to both of us. Living with Marcus was surprisingly easy. He was respectful of my need for solitude and personal space. He contributed equally to household tasks without needing to be reminded or managed. He understood that my past had left me hypervigilant about manipulation and control, so he made his intentions clear and his actions consistent. We built routines that felt comfortable rather than constraining. Morning coffee together before work. Evening walks with Copper along the beach. Weekends divided between social activities and quiet time at home. His family embraced me completely once we moved in together. His mother started calling me directly to invite me to family events, not routing the invitation through Marcus but treating me as an independent person worth connecting with. His siblings included me in group texts and inside jokes. His nieces and nephews called me Aunt Jade without prompting, as though I had always been part of their constellation. The casual acceptance was healing in ways I hadn't expected. They demonstrated daily that family could be a source of support, rather than extraction, connection rather than obligation. 5 years after selling the lake house, I was invited to speak at a conference about financial independence and family estrangement. The organizers had found my story through the documentation I had shared online years earlier, which had apparently become something of a resource in certain communities. They wanted me to talk about the practical and emotional aspects of protecting yourself from family financial abuse. I hesitated, uncertain whether I wanted to revisit that chapter so publicly. But Marcus encouraged me to consider it. "Your story helped you," he said. "Maybe it could help others too." I accepted the invitation and spent weeks preparing my presentation. I didn't want it to be a revenge narrative or a sob story. I wanted it to be useful, actionable, a roadmap for people facing similar situations. The conference was in Portland, a manageable drive from Brookings, and attracted several hundred attendees dealing with various forms of family estrangement. I was scheduled for an afternoon session in a medium-sized conference room. When I walked into that room and saw it packed beyond capacity, people sitting on the floor and standing along the walls, I realized how many people were struggling with these exact issues. I told my story clearly and without drama, walking through the discovery, the evidence gathering, the strategic response, and the aftermath. I emphasized the importance of documentation, legal protection, and emotional boundaries. I talked about the guilt and grief that came with cutting off family, acknowledging that doing the right thing didn't mean it felt easy. During the question period, hands shot up immediately. How do you handle holidays when everyone else is with family? How do you date when people judge you for being estranged? How do you know if you're making the right decision or just being selfish? I answered as honestly as I could, drawing from my own experience while acknowledging that everyone's situation was different. The common thread in all my responses was this: protecting yourself from harm isn't selfish, it's essential. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is create distance from people who refuse to treat you with basic respect. After the session ended, people lingered to talk. A woman in her 50s told me her parents had drained her inheritance to fund her brother's failed businesses, and she had felt guilty for being angry about it until hearing my story. A man in his 30s explained that his family expected him to financially support his adult siblings indefinitely, and he was terrified to set boundaries because of the backlash he would face. A young woman, barely 20, whispered that her parents had stolen her identity to open credit cards in her name, and she didn't know if she could report them without destroying the family. I listened to each person, offering what guidance I could while acknowledging I wasn't a therapist or lawyer, just someone who had survived a similar situation. What struck me most was the relief on their faces when I validated their experiences, when I confirmed that what was happening to them was wrong, and that protecting themselves was justified. So many of them had been told they were overreacting, being dramatic, failing to honor their family obligations. Hearing someone say, "No, you're not crazy, this is actually abuse," seemed to lift a burden they had been carrying alone. The conference organizers asked if I would be willing to write about my experience for their blog, maybe do follow-up presentations at future events. I agreed tentatively, still uncertain about becoming any kind of public figure around this topic. But I couldn't ignore the impact my story seemed to have on people who needed permission to protect themselves. If sharing what I had learned could help even a few people make difficult but necessary choices, it seemed worth the discomfort of revisiting painful memories. 6 years after the lake house sale, my life had settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable and genuine. Work remained fulfilling and financially rewarding. The cottage had become a true home, filled with furniture I selected and art I loved. The garden flourished under my care, producing more vegetables than Marcus and I could consume, so we started sharing extras with neighbors. Copper had transformed from an anxious rescue into a confident, playful companion who greeted every day with enthusiasm. My relationships felt solid and reciprocal, based on mutual care rather than obligation or manipulation. I still thought about my family occasionally, but the thoughts lacked the sharp edge they once carried. I wondered sometimes if my father's heart condition had worsened, whether Mitchell had managed to rebuild any semblance of the career he destroyed, if my mother had found any peace in the smaller, quieter life they now lived. But the wondering was abstract, the way you might think about characters in a book you read years ago. They were no longer central to my story. They were footnotes, context for understanding how I arrived at this place but not determining where I went from here. Marcus proposed on a gray January morning during our usual beach walk. There was no elaborate setup or crowd of witnesses, just the two of us in Copper and the sound of waves crashing against the shore. He told me he loved the life we had built together and wanted to make it permanent if I was willing. He understood my hesitation around traditional family structures, he said, but he hoped I might be willing to create our own version of commitment and partnership. One that honored my boundaries and history, while allowing us to build something forward-looking. I said yes, not because I felt pressure or obligation, but because I genuinely wanted the future he was describing. We planned a small ceremony for late spring, inviting only people who had actively supported us and contributed positively to our lives. His family would be there, of course. My book club friends, colleagues from work, the director of the women's shelter, Brandon Cole and his wife. No one from my birth family received an invitation. That chapter was closed, and I saw no reason to reopen it for a celebration that was supposed to be joyful rather than tense. The wedding took place in our backyard, under a canopy of flowers I had grown myself. 25 people gathered to witness our vows, eating food from local caterers and drinking wine from a nearby vineyard. It was simple and genuine, everything I had needed it to be. During the reception, Marcus's mother pulled me aside and told me something I would remember forever. "You've created a beautiful life after a terrible beginning," she said. "That takes strength most people never have to develop. I'm proud to call you family, Jade. Not because you married my son, but because of who you are." I hugged her tightly, feeling tears I didn't try to hide. This was what family should feel like. Support without strings attached. Pride without comparison. Love without conditions. I had spent 32 years not knowing this existed, and now I had built it for myself with people who chose me as deliberately as I chose them. That evening, after the guests had left and Marcus had fallen asleep beside me, I stepped onto the back porch and looked up at the stars. The ocean murmured in the distance, a constant presence that had witnessed my transformation from someone defined by other people's expectations into someone who knew her own worth. I thought about the woman who had stood on a different deck 6 years earlier, watching a coffee mug shatter and realizing her family was planning to rob her. That woman had been terrified and uncertain, torn between loyalty and self-preservation, unsure if she had the strength to fight back. I wished I could go back and tell her it would be okay, that the fear and pain and isolation wouldn't last forever. That on the other side of the hardest choice she would ever make was a life more peaceful and authentic than anything she had imagined. That walking away from people who hurt you doesn't make you broken or bitter, it makes you wise. That you can build a family from scratch with people who see you clearly and love you anyway. But I couldn't go back, so I honored that earlier version of myself by living fully in the present she had fought so hard to create. The lake house was gone, sold to protect myself from people who saw me as collateral. The family I was born into had scattered and diminished, consequences of their own choices finally catching up with them. And I had moved forward into a life that felt genuinely mine, built on foundations of respect and reciprocity, rather than obligation and manipulation. 7 years after the coffee mug shattered, I finally understood what my grandmother had been trying to tell me in those final conversations. You don't owe anyone your suffering, she had said. Not even family. Especially not family. At the time I thought she was being harsh or cynical. Now I recognized it as the clearest wisdom anyone had ever offered me. She had seen what I couldn't yet see, that my family would take everything I had if I let them, and that my only path to peace required protecting what was mine with absolute firmness. The inheritance she left me had bought the lake house, which I sold to save myself, which gave me the resources to build this life in Brookings. Every choice connected to the one before it, a chain of decisions leading from survival to flourishing. I wished she had lived to see what I built with the gift she gave me. I wished I could thank her for seeing my worth when the people closest to me refused to. But she was gone, and all I could do was live in a way that honored her belief in me. I went back inside, checked that the doors were locked and Copper was settled in his bed, then climbed into bed beside Marcus. His breathing was slow and steady, and I matched my rhythm to his, feeling safe in a way that had once seemed impossible. Tomorrow I would wake up to another ordinary day in a life I had fought to create. I would drink coffee and work on projects that challenged me and walk on the beach with my dog, and cook dinner with my husband and tend to my garden and maybe write another blog post for people navigating family estrangement. It wasn't a dramatic life or a particularly noteworthy one, but it was mine, entirely and completely mine, built on choices I made for myself rather than choices made for me by people who never bothered to know who I actually was. And that made it extraordinary in ways no one else might recognize but that I understood with absolute clarity. I had survived. I had healed. I had built something new from the wreckage of what came before. And I had done it without apology or permission or the approval of people who never deserved a say in my life to begin with. The ocean continued its eternal rhythm outside my window, waves crashing and retreating, eroding stone and building beaches, destroying and creating in the same breath. I had learned to move with that same natural force, knowing when to retreat for self-preservation, and when to crash forward with the full power of my truth. The balance wasn't always perfect, but it was mine to calibrate. And that autonomy, that fundamental right to determine my own path, was worth more than any lake house or family connection or social approval. I closed my eyes and let sleep pull me under, grateful for the peace that surrounded me and the strength that had carried me here. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys, and I would meet them as I had learned to meet everything. On my own terms with clear boundaries, and with the absolute certainty that I deserved to build a life that felt safe and authentic and mine. The girl who once believed her worth was tied to her family's approval was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her value was inherent, unchangeable, and required no external validation to exist. That knowledge was my foundation, and on it I had built a life worth living. The 8th year in Brookings brought changes I hadn't anticipated. Marcus accepted a promotion that would take him to a research facility in Monterey Bay for 6 months, and after much discussion we decided he should take it. The opportunity was significant for his career, and our relationship had grown strong enough to weather temporary distance. We talked every evening, sharing details of our days, maintaining connection across the miles. The separation reminded me I could be alone without being lonely, that I had built enough internal stability to not require constant external validation. During those months alone, I deepened my work with the women's shelter. The workshop series had expanded into a full program, and the director asked if I would consider joining the board of directors. The role would involve fundraising, strategic planning, and community outreach in addition to the direct service work I already did. I accepted, recognizing that my own healing had reached a point where I could channel it into systemic change rather than just individual support. The board meetings introduced me to people working across different aspects of social services and community development. A family law attorney who handled pro bono cases, a therapist specializing in trauma recovery, a city council member focused on affordable housing. These connections expanded my understanding of how family dysfunction intersected with larger systems of power and resource distribution. My personal experience became one thread in a much larger tapestry of people working to create safety for those escaping harmful situations. One evening after a board meeting, the family law attorney approached me. Her name was Diana Reeves, a woman in her early 60s with sharp eyes and a reputation for taking on difficult cases. She had read my story online years ago and wanted to discuss something. Would you consider allowing me to use your case as an educational example? Not in court, but in workshops I do for other attorneys about elder financial abuse and family fraud. Your documentation was impeccable, and your strategic response could teach lawyers how to advise clients in similar situations. I considered her request carefully. Sharing my story at conferences was one thing, but having it become part of legal education felt more permanent and far-reaching. Yet I recognized the potential value. How many people were being manipulated by family members right now, unsure whether they had legal recourse or were overreacting to normal family conflict? If my experience could train attorneys to recognize and address these patterns, perhaps it could prevent others from reaching the crisis point I had faced. I agreed with conditions. My full name wouldn't be used in the educational materials. The focus would remain on the legal and strategic elements, rather than the emotional narrative. Diana assured me she would handle it with professionalism and discretion. Within months, she had developed a presentation that walked attorneys through the warning signs of family financial fraud, the importance of documentation, and the legal mechanisms available to protect clients. She sent me a copy, and I was surprised by how clinical and useful it was. My pain had been transformed into a teaching tool, something that might help others avoid similar damage. The blog posts I had written for the Family Estrangement Conference had gained unexpected traction. Other websites and support groups shared them, and my email inbox regularly contained messages from people navigating their own difficult family situations. A literary agent reached out, suggesting I consider expanding the material into a book. Not a memoir exactly, but a practical guide combining personal experience with actionable advice for people dealing with family financial abuse, manipulation, and estrangement. The idea terrified and intrigued me in equal measure. Writing a book would require revisiting every detail of what happened, organizing it coherently, and exposing myself to a much larger audience than a conference room or blog post reached. But it would also create something permanent and potentially helpful, a resource that could exist beyond me and continue supporting people long after I moved on to other phases of life. I discussed it with Marcus during one of our evening calls. He listened thoughtfully as I outlined my concerns and excitement. What do you want to do? He asked simply. Not what you think you should do or what would help the most people. What do you actually want? The question stopped me. I had spent so much of my life doing what others expected that even now, years into recovery, I sometimes struggled to identify my own genuine desires beneath layers of perceived obligation. I want to write it, I admitted. I want to take everything I learned and create something that might make the journey easier for someone else. I want the pain to mean something beyond just my own survival. Marcus's response was immediate. Then write it. I'll support you however I can. His unconditional encouragement reminded me why I had chosen to build a life with him. He didn't need me to be anything other than who I was, and he trusted me to make decisions that served my own well-being. I signed with the literary agent and spent the next year writing. The process was more difficult than I anticipated, requiring me to relive moments I had worked hard to move past. But it was also cathartic in unexpected ways. Organizing the chaos into narrative form gave me perspective on how far I had come. The woman who discovered forged documents and felt her world collapse now seemed like a character in a story, rather than my present reality. Distance had transformed acute pain into analyzed experience, something I could examine and learn from rather than something actively wounding me. The book, which we titled Reclaiming Yourself, A Guide to Surviving Family Financial Abuse and Estrangement, was published 2 years later. I used a pen name, wanting to maintain some privacy while still sharing the story. The advance was modest but meaningful, and I donated half of it to the women's shelter. The book launch was small and local, held at the independent bookstore in Brookings where I had become a regular customer over the years. What surprised me was the response. The book sold steadily rather than spectacularly, but it found its audience. Support groups recommended it. Therapists suggested it to clients. People dealing with family estrangement found it through online searches and word of mouth. The reviews were deeply personal, with readers sharing how seeing their experience reflected in print had validated their own difficult choices. One review that stayed with me read, "This book gave me permission to protect myself without feeling like a monster. That's a gift I didn't know I needed." I did a limited book tour, speaking at libraries and community centers in Oregon, Washington, and Northern California. Each event drew 20 to 50 people, intimate gatherings rather than large crowds. The conversations that followed my readings were profound. People shared their stories, asked for advice, and found community with others facing similar struggles. A woman in Seattle told me her parents had forged her name on a reverse mortgage, nearly costing her the house she thought she owned. A man in Eugene described how his siblings had systematically stolen from their mother while she was in a nursing home, then blamed him for reporting it. The patterns repeated across demographics and geographies, proving this wasn't just my family's dysfunction, but a widespread problem many people faced in silence. 9 years after selling the lake house, I received an unexpected email. The subject line read simply, "From Mitchell." My immediate instinct was to delete it without reading, but curiosity overrode caution. I opened it and found a message that was neither apologetic nor hostile, just factual and tired. "Jade, I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I'm not asking for anything or trying to restart contact. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what we did to you. It took losing everything, my marriage and career and reputation, to see how entitled and destructive I had been. Therapy helped, though I resisted it for years. I'm working in Arizona doing honest work for the first time in my life, and I'm trying to be a decent father to my boys even though I only see them part-time. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted to acknowledge that you were right to protect yourself. What we tried to do was wrong, and I'm sorry I didn't see it until the consequences forced my eyes open. I hope you've built a good life. You deserved better than what we gave you. Mitchell." I read the email 3 times, searching for manipulation or hidden agenda. But it seemed genuine, the words of someone who had genuinely reckoned with his own behavior. I felt no rush of emotion, no surge of vindication or anger or relief. Just a quiet acknowledgement that he had finally arrived at understanding I reached years ago. His growth, however real, didn't change what happened or create any obligation on my part to respond. I saved the email in a folder and closed my laptop. Maybe someday I would reply or maybe I wouldn't. The decision didn't feel urgent. Mitchell's journey toward accountability was his responsibility, not mine to manage or validate. If he needed my forgiveness to complete his healing, that was a problem he would have to solve without my participation. I had spent enough years managing other people's emotional needs. Now I was focused on my own continued growth and well-being. Marcus returned from Monterey Bay with stories of research breakthroughs and marine life discoveries that lit up his face with enthusiasm. We fell back into our shared routines easily, the separation having strengthened rather than weakened our bond. He had accepted a permanent position at the local research station, ensuring we could stay in Brookings indefinitely. We talked about buying a larger house together, maybe something with enough land for a more extensive garden and room for the family we were considering starting. The possibility of children brought up questions I had been avoiding. Would I parent differently than my own parents had? Would old patterns resurface under the stress of raising kids? Could I trust myself to build a healthy family dynamic when I had never experienced one? Marcus and I talked through these concerns with his characteristic patience and insight. "You're not your parents," he reminded me. "You've spent years learning different patterns and building different relationships. And we'll be doing this together, making decisions jointly rather than one person dominating the family culture." We decided to try for a child, approaching parenthood with the same intentionality we brought to other major decisions. I reduced my work hours and prepared emotionally for the massive shift a baby would bring. When I became pregnant 10 months later, the joy was tempered with anxiety. I worried constantly about repeating my parents' mistakes, about unconsciously favoring one child over another if we had multiple kids, about failing to see my child clearly because of my own unresolved issues. Therapy helped manage these fears. I had started seeing a counselor shortly after moving to Brookings, working through the layers of family trauma and building healthier coping mechanisms. Now, with pregnancy hormones intensifying every emotion, those therapy sessions became essential anchors. My therapist helped me distinguish between realistic concerns and catastrophic thinking, between honoring my past and being imprisoned by it. You're aware of the patterns, she told me. That awareness alone makes you unlikely to repeat them. And you're building a support system your parents never had. You're not doing this alone or in denial. Our daughter was born on a bright October morning, arriving with a fierce cry that announced her presence unmistakably. We named her Marina, after the ocean that had witnessed my transformation and rebirth. Holding her in those first hours, I felt a protective surge unlike anything I had experienced. This tiny person would never wonder if she was loved. She would never question her worth or feel like a burden. She would grow up knowing she was wanted and valued, not as a resource or extension of her parents, but as her own complete person. The early months of parenthood were exhausting and magical in turns. Sleepless nights blurred into endless diaper changes and feeding sessions. But even in the fog of exhaustion, I noticed Marcus and I working as genuine partners. He never treated childcare as my responsibility or his contribution as helping out. We divided tasks based on what made sense, communicated when we were overwhelmed, and asked for support when we needed it. His parents visited regularly, bringing meals and offering to watch Marina so we could sleep or take a walk together. This was what healthy family looked like. Mutual support without scorekeeping, help offered freely without strings attached. When Marina was 6 months old, my mother sent a card. Not to me directly, but to our home address she must have found through public records or online searching. The card was simple, congratulating us on the baby and expressing hope that she might someday meet her granddaughter. There was no pressure or manipulation in the message, just a grandmother's wistful wish to know her grandchild. I showed the card to Marcus, uncertain how to respond or whether to respond at all. "What do you want?" he asked, echoing the question he had posed about writing the book. The answer was less clear this time. I didn't want my mother back in my life in any significant way. Too much damage had been done, and I had worked too hard to build stability I wouldn't risk disrupting. But I also recognized that Marina might someday have questions about her extended family, might wonder about the grandparents who weren't present. Did I owe her the opportunity to form her own relationship with them, or was protecting her from potentially toxic people the more important responsibility? I talked it through in therapy, exploring what limited contact might look like and what boundaries would need to be in place. Eventually, I sent a brief response. "Thank you for the card. Marina is healthy and wonderful. I'm not ready for regular contact, but I've enclosed a photo. If that changes in the future, I'll let you know." I included a single picture of Marina, nothing that showed our house or gave away identifying details about our life. It was a small opening, carefully controlled, that acknowledged the connection without inviting intrusion. My mother's response came quickly, a heartfelt thank you and a promise to respect my boundaries. She didn't push for more or try to negotiate increased contact. She simply expressed gratitude for the photo and wished us well. The restraint surprised me and suggested she might have done her own work around understanding what she had done wrong. Whether that growth was genuine or temporary, I couldn't know. But I appreciated the respect for boundaries I had set. 10 years after selling the lake house, I stood in my garden holding Marina on my hip while she pointed at butterflies and babbled her toddler observations. The cottage had been expanded, an addition creating more space for our growing family. The garden had matured into something truly beautiful, a mix of vegetables, flowers, and native plants that attracted birds and beneficial insects. Copper, now significantly older and slower, dozed in the shade of a fruit tree Marcus and I had planted our first year in the house together. This life bore no resemblance to the one I had imagined in my 20s, when I still believed earning my parents' approval was possible and necessary. That version of myself had accepted scraps and called it love, had absorbed mistreatment and labeled it family obligation. She had been so desperate for belonging that she tolerated being invisible, secondary, perpetually not quite enough. Standing in this garden with my daughter and my home and my chosen family, I barely recognized that earlier version of myself. The transformation had been so complete that looking back felt like reading someone else's history. Marina squirmed to get down, toddling unsteadily toward the raised garden beds where tomatoes grew heavy on their vines. I followed closely, ready to catch her if she stumbled, marveling at her fearless exploration. She had no concept yet of the complexities that had shaped my life, the betrayals and difficult choices and years of rebuilding. To her, the world was safe because we made it safe. She trusted because we were trustworthy. She explored freely because we created space for her autonomy and curiosity. This was what I wanted to give her above all else. A childhood where love was consistent and unconditional, where her worth was inherent rather than earned, where she could develop into whoever she was meant to be without having to fight for basic recognition and respect. Marcus joined us in the garden, scooping Marina up and spinning her in a circle that made her shriek with laughter. Watching them together, I felt the last traces of old pain dissolve into something softer and more integrated. The wounds from my original family hadn't disappeared, but they had transformed into scar tissue, still present but no longer actively bleeding. I had learned to carry that history, without being defined by it, to acknowledge its impact while refusing to let it determine my present or future. The lake house sale had been the catalyst, the moment of choosing myself over their expectations. But the real work had been everything that came after. The therapy and boundary setting, the careful construction of healthy relationships, the daily practice of believing I deserved safety and respect. I had spent years afraid that cutting off my family made me cold or damaged or incapable of genuine connection. Instead, removing their toxic influence had created space for relationships deeper and more authentic than anything I experienced with them. The family I built through choice rather than biology had shown me what love actually looked like when it wasn't contingent on compliance or service. Marcus, his family, my friends, the community I had cultivated in Brookings, these people valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. 11 years after the coffee mug shattered on the lake house deck, I published a second book. This one focused specifically on rebuilding after family estrangement, offering practical guidance for creating chosen family, managing grief and guilt, and developing resilience in the absence of traditional family support. The writing came more easily this time, informed by additional years of healing, and by watching others navigate similar journeys. The book included contributions from people I had met through the shelter work and conferences, creating a chorus of voices rather than a single narrative. The response was even stronger than the first book. Media outlets reached out for interviews, wanting to discuss the growing phenomenon of adults choosing to distance themselves from family members. I appeared on podcasts and radio shows, carefully maintaining my privacy while speaking openly about the general patterns and principles. The cultural conversation around family estrangement was shifting, moving from automatic condemnation toward more nuanced understanding that sometimes distance was necessary and healthy. Not everyone appreciated this shift. Some reviewers criticized the book for undermining family values and encouraging selfishness. Religious communities sometimes pushed back against the idea that honoring your parents didn't require tolerating abuse. But increasingly, mental health professionals, social workers, and people with direct experience recognized that toxic family systems existed, and that leaving them was often the only viable option for survival and flourishing. Marina grew into a spirited, confident 4-year-old who asked endless questions and approached the world with unbridled enthusiasm. She knew her paternal grandparents well, spending regular time with them and absorbing their warmth and stability. When she asked about my parents, I answered honestly but age-appropriately. I have a mom and dad, but we don't see each other because they made choices that hurt me. Sometimes people we love can't be safe for us, and it's okay to create distance to protect ourselves. She accepted this explanation without distress, secure enough in her own loved circle to not feel the absence of people she had never known. We had decided to have a second child, and I was pregnant again. This pregnancy felt less fraught with anxiety than the first. I had proven to myself that I could parent with love and intention, that I could break the cycles that had been passed to me. Marina's secure attachment and joyful personality demonstrated daily that my fears of repeating my parents' mistakes were largely unfounded. I still made errors, moments of impatience or misunderstanding, but I apologized when I was wrong and adjusted my approach based on Marina's needs rather than my ego. Marcus had been approached about writing a book of his own, a general audience publication about ocean conservation. He worked on it during Marina's nap times and after she went to bed, and I supported his project the way he had supported mine. We had become partners in the fullest sense, two people building a life together, while maintaining individual identities and pursuits. Neither of us had lost ourselves in the relationship or in parenthood. We had expanded, grown, incorporated new dimensions without erasing who we were fundamentally. 12 years after selling the lake house, Brandon Cole called with unexpected news. He was selling the property. The vacation rental business had been successful, but he was consolidating his holdings and the lake house was part of that transition. He wanted to give me first right of refusal before listing it publicly. I could buy it back if I wanted, return to the place where my transformation began. The offer was generous and entirely unexpected. I thanked him but declined almost immediately. The lake house represented a chapter that was complete. I had no desire to return to that space, to live surrounded by ghosts of who I used to be and what I had survived. My home was here in Brookings, in the cottage Marcus and I had made together, in the community I had built from nothing. The lake house had served its purpose, giving me something valuable enough to protect and a crisis that forced me to choose myself. But I didn't need to reclaim it to validate that choice. The life I built afterward was proof enough. Brandon understood without needing lengthy explanation. He sold the lake house to a young couple who planned to live there full-time, and I felt genuinely happy for them. The property would serve a new family now, hold new memories and stories. My connection to it was complete, a closed loop that required no reopening. Our son was born in early spring, arriving with less drama than his sister but equal intensity. We named him Asher, a name meaning fortunate and blessed, because that was how we felt despite the chaos of adding a second child to our household. Marina was fascinated by her baby brother, wanting to help with everything from diaper changes to feeding time. Watching her gentle care of Asher, I saw proof that secure children raised with love naturally extended that love to others. She had never competed for our attention because she had never doubted its availability. The adjustment to two children was challenging but manageable. Marcus and I had learned systems and communication patterns that served us well even under increased stress. His parents remained actively involved, offering practical support without overstepping boundaries. My book royalties and speaking fees had created financial cushion that allowed us to hire occasional childcare help when we needed breaks. We were building the family neither of us had experienced growing up, learning as we went but committed to doing it differently and better. 13 years after the coffee mug shattered, I received a phone call from Aunt Caroline. My father had died of a heart attack, sudden and massive, leaving no time for goodbyes or deathbed reconciliations. Caroline wanted me to know before I heard through other channels. She asked gently if I planned to attend the funeral, making it clear there was no pressure or judgment either way. I thanked her for the call and promised to think about it. Marcus and I discussed it that evening after the children were in bed. I felt surprisingly little emotional reaction to the news. Not relief, not grief, just a kind of neutral acknowledgement that a person who had been in my life was no longer living. Whatever relationship we might have rebuilt was now permanently foreclosed. There would be no future conversation, no possibility of him understanding what he had done wrong, no chance for the acknowledgement and apology I had once desperately wanted. I decided not to attend the funeral. The decision felt clear and uncomplicated. My father and I had been estranged for over a decade. Showing up to his funeral would create spectacle and drama that served no one. My presence would raise questions and generate gossip that would overshadow whatever mourning my mother and Mitchell needed to do. I had no unfinished business requiring closure at a graveside. The closure I needed had been created through years of therapy, boundary setting, and building a life that didn't include him. I sent flowers to the funeral home with a simple card. Condolences to the family. The gesture acknowledged the death without implying reconciliation or forgiveness. I didn't feel. Aunt Caroline reported back that my mother had appreciated the flowers and understood my absence. Mitchell had apparently been hoping I would attend, wanting some kind of reconciliation or healing moment. But that was his need, not mine to fulfill. His journey toward peace with our family history remained his responsibility. The months following my father's death brought unexpected shifts. Without his presence holding certain dynamics in place, relationships within the extended family rearranged themselves. Aunt Caroline reached out more frequently, and we developed a cautious but genuine connection. She shared family news and photos, never pressuring for more contact than I wanted to give, but making it clear I would be welcome if I chose to engage more fully. A few cousins I had been close to in childhood reconnected, curious about my life and wanting to rebuild relationships apart from the toxic patterns our parents had created. My mother sent a letter after the funeral, longer and more vulnerable than her previous communications. She wrote about the loneliness of widowhood, the ways my father's death had forced her to confront how much of her identity had been wrapped up in being his wife and Mitchell's champion. She acknowledged more directly than ever before the ways she had failed me, the moments she should have protected me but chose comfort and compliance instead. She didn't ask for forgiveness or reconciliation. She simply said she was sorry and that she understood why I had needed to leave. I read the letter multiple times, analyzing it for manipulation or hidden agenda. But it seemed genuinely reflective, the words of someone who had finally run out of excuses and distractions. I appreciated the accountability without feeling obligated to do anything with it. Her growth, if genuine, was good for her. But it didn't erase the past or create a foundation for future relationship. Too much damage had been done over too many years. The best I could offer was acknowledgement that I had received her letter and recognition that writing it must have been difficult. 14 years after selling the lake house, Marina started kindergarten and Asher began preschool. The cottage felt simultaneously too quiet during school hours and wonderfully spacious. I expanded my work, taking on more speaking engagements and consulting projects with organizations working on family justice issues. Marcus's research was gaining recognition in his field, with publications in prestigious journals and invitations to conferences around the world. We were both building careers we found meaningful, while maintaining the family life we had intentionally created. The women's shelter where I volunteered received a significant grant, allowing them to expand services and hire additional staff. They offered me a paid position as program director, overseeing the workshops and support services I had helped develop. The role would require more hours than my volunteer work, but offered salary and benefits that made financial sense for our family. I accepted, recognizing this was a natural evolution of work I was already passionate about. The position connected me with advocates and organizers across the region, people working on domestic violence prevention, housing justice, financial literacy, and family law reform. I learned about legislative efforts to strengthen protections against elder abuse and family fraud, policy changes that might make situations like mine less common or easier to address legally. My personal experience had led to professional expertise that was genuinely useful in these broader contexts. The pain had been transformed completely, no longer a wound but a source of wisdom and strategic insight. Marina came home from school one day with questions about family trees, an assignment that required her to chart her relatives and ancestry. She knew about Marcus's family, had met aunts and uncles and cousins and grandparents who featured regularly in her life. But my side of the tree was sparse, showing gaps and absences her classmates' projects wouldn't have. We sat together at the kitchen table, and I helped her fill in what information I had while explaining as simply as I could why some branches ended abruptly. Sometimes families have missing pieces, I told her. Sometimes people make choices that mean they can't be part of our lives safely. That's sad, but it's also okay. We build family in different ways. Some people are related by blood, and some people become family through choice and love. Both kinds are real. She absorbed this with the resilient pragmatism of childhood, more interested in decorating her family tree with stickers than worried about its irregular shape. Her security allowed her to accept complexity without anxiety, proof that children raised with consistent love can handle difficult truths. 15 years after the coffee mug shattered, I stood at the ocean's edge watching the sun set in brilliant oranges and purples. Marina and Asher played in the sand nearby, building an elaborate castle with channels for water and towers adorned with shells. Marcus stood beside me, his hand warm in mine, and we watched our children create something temporary and beautiful that tomorrow's tide would erase. The impermanence didn't diminish their joy or effort. They built because building itself was satisfying, not because they needed the castle to last forever. I had learned a similar lesson about life and healing. Nothing was permanent. Relationships shifted, pain transformed, circumstances changed in ways both devastating and miraculous. The key was to keep building anyway, to create beauty and meaning even knowing it would eventually change form. The lake house was gone. My original family was fractured beyond repair. The woman I used to be had dissolved completely, replaced by someone stronger and clearer, and more authentically myself. But I had this. The cottage on the hill, the garden that flourished under my care, the partner who saw and valued me completely, the children growing up secure and loved, the work that gave my experience purpose beyond my own healing. I had built all of this from nothing, from the wreckage of what came before, from the hard choice to protect myself when no one else would. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The sun dipped below the horizon, and Marina called out that they needed help carrying water from the waves to fill their castle moat. I walked across the sand to join them, leaving footprints that the tide would erase by morning. But for now, in this moment, we were here together building something that mattered not because it would last but because we chose to create it. And that choice, repeated daily across years, was how you transformed survival into flourishing, wounds into wisdom, isolation into belonging. The ocean continued its eternal rhythm, waves crashing and retreating, constant and ever-changing. I had learned to move with that same force, fierce when necessary and gentle when possible, always returning to myself as the center point from which everything else extended. The past no longer held power over me. The future stretched open and full of possibility. And the present, this ordinary, extraordinary moment with my family on a beach in Oregon, was exactly where I needed to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.